Let's go.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
So we give Chris a break this morning because it's hard to put on a show by yourself, especially with an audience this large, because you don't get the energy.
Look, if you guys had to, it does get difficult to come up with topics to kind of get things rolling. That's why we've been trying to add in more people, and then it gets even more tough because then we're on
took away Monday and
we're
Friday.
on Mondays, we're on Tuesdays, on Wednesdays. I'll have a break on Thursday and then back on Friday. So we're doing stuff every single day. So there's a lot of content, a lot of info, and we're always trying to provide value. So I've reached out to Jimmy a few times. I've reached out to some other management who will be stepping in to try and bring some more value. Craig and I were talking yesterday about some of the things going on. We haven't had a contract class in a while, which is why I talked about some contract stuff about a month ago. And we haven't had a real Friday contracts class. So we're going to talk about contracts.
And lo and behold, the contract issues have not stopped.
Yeah,
So they just build up in the inbox. You go, oh shit, what are we going to talk about these things?
Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about, and not just contracts, but also agency, which will play into your contracts and how you represent your buyers and sellers. So those are the main topics for today. We're going to talk about issues with listings, buyers, how to avoid them, how to address them, and just try to make you guys aware, because what's your statement about?
Awareness gives you flexibility, and flexibility gives you options, and options give you power. And we all want power, right?
Yep.
So
And
that's why I read so much, because I want to be, and there's a lot of bullshit out there too.
There is.
You got to be careful what you read.
Yep.
But awareness gives you flexibility. I learned a lot yesterday about these bank failures.
Yeah.
I talked to one of our financial guys yesterday, and he's like, if you have more than $250,000 in one checking account, you're in trouble. I mean, this morning I read something about run on banks. Some people that have, let's say you have $500,000 in the bank, and you go to the bank and say, I want 250 back. Well, the bank doesn't have your 250.
Yep.
And the bank has lent your 250 in some other way, shape, or form. They don't have liquidity to get it back for you. And then we lose confidence. And the confidence is the number one thing we need in the economy to keep things moving forward. And these now three banks have failed, and we're losing public confidence. So watch the stock market fall today and watch all this other shit happen today.
Yep.
And we actually are in a good position because I don't have more than $250,000 in the account. We have like 10 accounts, but none of them have more than that. And they're all in different banks. And so we're safe.
And then one of the big things that I had heard yesterday was the reason that such a large bank failed was because they were the inverse relation to the amount of deposits that they have and their protection. The majority of their over 90% of their deposits were in excess of the $250,000, when the majority of banks, they're the opposite of that. They're saying 75% or greater is less than $250,000. And that was one thing that did create such a scare for people, because there's so much money that's there.
Well, they're also a crypto bank.
Yeah.
And what has happened to cryptocurrency?
It's been
Bitcoin was over $60,000. Now it's $20,000. So if your liquidity was based on a $60,000 cryptocurrency average, Bitcoin average.
Yep.
And now Bitcoin's only 20. Well, you might have had $1 million in Bitcoin, but now they got $200,000 in Bitcoin. So your liquidity is shot. And that's what the bank lets your things on. The regulators go, whoa, you don't have enough collateral to back up these loans you made. And that's where the problem comes in.
And then they had bonds that are that they bought that are somewhat worthless, because the bonds that they had purchased in 2020 were lower interest rate bonds, which means the bond price was higher. And then as the interest rate on as the interest rate by the Fed goes up, the interest rate of the bond the interest rate goes up, it goes up as well, but then the value of the bond goes down.
Right.
So like they had so much money in bonds as well. So there's a combination of a lot of things that lead us to just, be aware. Make sure that you have flexibility, make sure that you give yourself options and you put yourself in a good position. And this business gives you that opportunity to do that, to be able to put yourself in a position to earn some additional cash, put your 6 months of cash reserves in the bank, buy some investment properties so that you have some money that's vested.
Is the key.
100%. So, and this business gives you that opportunity. And that's why we are blessed, and we've continued to be blessed. So take advantage of the blessings that are available to us.
And stay tuned. I mean, we don't produce fake news. There's a lot of fake news out in the marketplace.
Yep.
If it falls on my desk, it's real.
We try our best to grab the information that we have, to not be the fear and doubt in the marketplace, and just try to bring the information for what it is and bring it as value, and then make us aware and give us the options to make the best decision. So that's what we're here for.
We'll talk about awareness. Let's do this, because I've had numerous conversations with chief legal counsel at FAR. And I told them about, I had a really good question, because the 14-hour continuing education, chapter 4, it really doesn't go into detail about agency. So I was talking to her at the time, she was chief counsel. Her name is Margie Green. And I told her our position on single agency and how we allow you guys to do that. And she said, oh God, please don't. It's a scary thing. So I'm going to go back into some of the situations that we've had going on that are still going on.
Why would she say that?
It's just risk and liability, right? So we have to teach you to do it the right way. And we've taught you to do it the right way, but it went in one ear and out the other. So those of you who are playing the single agency game may not be doing it the right way. And that's a concern. So I've got a lawsuit going right now with an agent who no longer works for us, which those are really fun, right? I like being the broker for an agent who no longer works for us, who 3 years ago made a mistake and now we're getting sued. But a buyer called in on her listing, and that buyer professed to be an expert real estate investor. That buyer had her own loan officer hooked up. That buyer identified the property she wanted to buy. Our agent took her and showed her that property and she wrote it. It turned out it was a co-op, which means it's not, you don't own, it's not fee simple.
Mhm.
You get to buy the building, the interior parts of the building, and you own a percentage of the park, but it's not real estate. And this is in St. Petersburg downtown. And there's no real conventional financing for a co-op. But this buyer felt so confident with her relationship with the lender she brought to the table that she wrote an offer and put a substantial 20 or 30, $40,000 deposit.
And this was during the
This is the
absolute,
boom of the market.
like 2021, where everything was crazy. 2021, early 2020, or yeah, 2020, 2021, everything was crazy, waiving everything, giving up your protection to get something under contract so you don't lose it.
So our agent made some strong recommendations. Look, there's multiple offers on this property. It's going to go, it's probably going to go above asking price. So our agent asked for a large deposit and a strong offer and did all those things going through, which is right. And now time has passed and the buyer has $20,000, which the seller conceded and gave them half of their deposit back, which was a kind thing to do because they didn't have to.
Mhm.
But now the buyer's pissed 2 years later and hires a lawyer. And the lawyer writes us a demand letter saying, pay us $20,000 because you caused our agent or buyer to lose their deposit.
Mhm.
Well, that case fell away. But then the buyer goes and gets another attorney. Another attorney writes a letter to us saying, hey, this buyer was damaged. Their old attorney is no longer working for them. I'm working for them. Please write us a check for $20,000 for this loss of damage. And I called her back and said, what the hell are you talking about? She goes, well, you had a fiduciary responsibility to this buyer to protect their interest. And I went, huh?
Uh-huh.
So I called our CNA, is our insurance company, Continental Casualty, whatever they're called. And Kevin Apple's my adjuster, and he's badass. I mean, Kevin has been nudged and pushed in every direction, and he just nothing but facts, ma'am. It's just like, you know, what's that show? Nothing but facts, ma'am. So that's all it is with him. And so he calls me and says, hey, were you a transaction broker or a single agent? And I called our ex-agent and said, hey, were you a transaction broker or a single agent? She goes, I don't know. Well, problem number one, if you're a single agent, you should know.
Yes.
And I said, did you use .loop? And she said, yes. So I was able to go into the loop, which is important while you need to submit for review. So we have all your shit in one place if we ever need it, because we don't need it today or tomorrow or yesterday. We need it 2 years from now when this issue pops up.
Yep.
So I checked the loop. There's no single agent notice. So I write our adjuster back and I say, look, we were not a single agent. We were a transaction broker, which means we really have no fiduciary responsibility. So he wrote back to the attorney and said, sorry, your facts are wrong. We don't have a fiduciary obligation. Your buyer did this, and that has since silenced itself.
What does a fiduciary responsibility, for those of you who may not fully understand that, can we kind of cover what that means? What does a fiduciary responsibility entail between a principal and an agent?
It makes you be responsible for your advice to the consumer,
Mhm.
right? Other than that, I'm just helping you out. Kumbaya, we hug each other and we keep the deal together.
I'm a professional. I can provide you advice. Don't hold, just like the contract says, don't hold me liable for
Things I'm not responsible
for things I'm not, I'll give you advice, but you can't really hold me liable for this advice. If you need it, you need to seek other professionals to make yourself feel comfortable. And that's kind of what the contract says.
Mhm.
But as a single agent, you now become responsible for everything that you tell her. and you become it becomes more of
You're like their lawyer.
a principal and client relationship rather than just a buyer and an agent relationship.
Yeah, I can sue my lawyer for giving me bad advice because he is supposed to have my back, right? As a transaction broker, I don't have your back. I have the transactions back, which is a hell of a lot easier. That's why the big companies like Coldwell Banker, NRT, they don't allow single agency. They just can't. They've got 45,000 agents in 50 different states with 50 different laws, and period. No, you're not taking on that onus. So you guys can take on that onus. And at the end of this, I want you to know what you have to do that. Right. And it's a big deal to talk about it and use it to your advantage. And that's why we want you to do it. But if you're going to do it, you got to do it right.
That's why we do all the training we do. That's why we talk about all of the topics we do and try and stay engaged with you as much as possible, because our listing agreement has it built in that you are going to be a single agent. So if you're taking listings, you are a single agent for your seller. And we need you to be aware of what that really means and how you need to provide that advice, how you need to provide that value, how you need to protect that seller and also yourself and our company through this transaction. We just need to give you this information so that you understand it.
4 things. FOLC. That's the 4 things a single agent has that a transaction broker doesn't.
Who wants to type in what the
Type in FOLC.
Tell me what FOLC
And
is.
not counting Jeff. He knows it. Who are your attendees?
So
F.
FOLC in your single agent, your single
Capacity.
agency, and in our single agent listing agreement, there's a difference. Full disclosure is one of them.
Yes.
Loyalty is
Yes.
another one.
Go, Laura. Go, Laura. Go, Laura. Fiduciary, obedience,
Okay.
loyalty, and confidence. Yeah. Wow, Lauren.
Well,
It
that,
pays when you show up to training like every time we do something.
well, it's full disclosure, not fiduciary.
Right. So what is, let's take each one of those individually. Full disclosure. If you know something, you have to tell it. That's it.
To your client.
To your, yes.
This is the relationship between, I owe you the duty of full disclosure. If something happens, I not only do I have to tell you, I must tell you. I
Right.
can't.
So here it is. I'm an agent. You're an agent. Hey, Chris, between you and I, the seller, I know they want 475, 450 is going to make it happen.
Cool.
Okay.
I'm gonna
As a single agent, what do you tell me is your buyer?
Oh, if you're my buyer, I would come to you and I have to tell you that, hey, I was just talking with the listing agent and they were telling me that even though they're listed at 475, that he believes that the seller will take 450 and that will get it done. So why don't we go ahead and start angling in that direction?
Which is a great thing to do for 2 agents working to put a transaction together, right? Because that's what we do. I love working with Danya Perry because that's what we do. We just put the deal together.
Yep.
Right. But as a transaction broker, the listing agent comes and tells you that. What do you tell me as your client as a transaction broker?
I have to tell you what's going to be in the best interest of the transaction, not putting the seller to a detriment, because I cannot put one party's interest to the detriment of the other. So
you could lean and say, hey, Craig, I think there's some negotiation room here.
Correct.
But I can't tell you that the listing agent told me 450, I'll get this house.
Yep.
All right. Now, if I were the buyer, what capacity do I want my agent representing me in?
In a single agent capacity.
100%. Given the option, hey, Craig, it costs you no more, but I can be a single agent or a transaction broker. And here's an example. What would you rather me be?
Yep.
100% single agent all the way. So if you're presenting it that way, they're going to say, yes, I want to be a single agent. Now, I'm going to go back in time
Yep.
to 1996, I think it was. 96, 4 years, 20 years, 27 years ago, the Florida Real Estate Commission changed Chapter 475 and said, there's a lot of confusion. This is a time when real estate agents were, well, they're still not held in high regard, but they were held in lower regard than they are now. And a buyer movement came up and the buyers realized that they were not being represented by the public, by the real estate community. Because then all agents, buyers agents and sellers agents, represented the seller in the transaction. So a huge buyer movement came up and buyers felt the need to be told how they were being represented. So in their infinite wisdom, the Florida Real Estate Commission said, here's what we're going to do. And these are the words. At first substantive contact, The first time I meet Chris, hey, Chris, I'm Craig, nice to meet you. Hey, before we go any further, there's three ways you can be represented in a real estate transaction. I can represent you as a single agent, as a transaction broker, or as a non-rep. And this is what all three of those mean. Which one would you like? And I'd have to present a form and you'd have to sign that form. And I had to keep that form in my broker file for 3 years. And the Florida Real Estate Commission would come to our office and look through our filing cabinets, pull out the drawers and pull out the file folder jackets that had all the paperwork for every file in it to make sure there's an agency disclosure. Right. And that went on for years, from 1996, probably to 1996 to maybe 2000. And then the Real Estate Commission, in its wisdom, said, okay, the word's on the street. We're just going to make it, you're presumed to be a transaction broker. So all agents are transaction brokers, period, unless they sign a notice of non-rep, like you're working a FSBO, or they sign a single agent notice, which says you're a single agent notice. Now, inside the single agent notice is a problem because we're a large brokerage. We have a lot of listings. So, and no offense, but I say this a lot, you don't exist in the transaction in Florida. It's the broker. So Century 21 Beggins Enterprises is the broker, and it represents the buyer for this property. If Century 21 Beggins has the listing, then we also represent the seller on that listing. Right. And because of the listing agreement we put in .loop for you, which is a single agent listing agreement with consent to transition to transaction broker, we are all single agents, but we can't show our own listing because we, the brokerage, is a single agent for the seller. So you, as an agent for Beggins, can't show that listing because you represent the seller. So we have to tell the seller, look, I have to transition to a transaction broker for me to have one of my agents show your property. So that's why we have a single agent listing notice with the consent to transaction. So that's a lot of words, to transaction brokerage.
Yep. And it's the same thing as a buyer. If you're a buyer's agent, you can sign a single agent notice,
But you can't show any of our listings.
but you can't show any of our listings if you're a single agent, because Century 21 Beggins Enterprises is the
Listing
agent,
broker.
listing broker for the listing. Even if we were a transaction broker for the seller, if you're a single agent for the buyer, you can't show any of our listings. So it goes both ways. You can't be a single agent on both sides or either side of a transaction as as Century 21 Beggins Enterprises.
Correct. So that's why I got in a conversation with Margie, who was the former attorney for Florida Association of Realtors. And the question was, and she didn't have an answer for me. I said, when do I have to disclose to Chris that I'm a single agent? Because from the onset, we are.
As me as a consumer or me as the agent?
You as the agent.
Me as the agent.
And this is where I think we've been screwing up a lot, because we're saying we're a single agent, but the only way you're a single agent is if you and your customer sign a single agent notice making Century 21 Beggins their single agent, right?
Yep.
So now I'm a single agent. Does he know that? He's a cooperating broker. How does he know? We're deemed to be transaction brokers. So we can be having a conversation talking about, hey, 450, 475.
Because he has the same idea as the consumer does. He is presuming that we are all transaction
We're
brokers,
working to make this deal come together.
unless there's a disclosure that there's a single agent that's involved, whether I've disclosed to my consumer and then I disclose to him or vice versa. He's assuming that there's transaction broker relationships like the law states.
Right.
And then
So he has no reason to second guess my intentions. I'm trying to sandbag, pull information out that I can go share with my consumer because I'm a single agent. But he doesn't know I'm a single agent because we're presumed to be transaction brokers. So where we've been screwing up potentially is not saying, hey, Chris, I'm a single agent, so don't tell me any shit that you don't want me to hear, because I'm going straight to my customer with it. So if I don't tell him that, then he's presuming that I'm a transaction broker and he'll spill his guts. But I can't use that. I shouldn't use that information against his client because I didn't disclose my status as a super ninja badass single agent.
And
right.
One of the Florida Realtors guidelines is that if you are a single agent, it says you must disclose that to the other party in the transaction. You must disclose it to the other side, whoever, whether it's a buyer's agent or seller's agent.
Well, let's talk about how to do that, because that's really simple.
Yeah.
Right. Number one, to become a single agent, you have to engage and sign a single agent notice with the consumer. And we're going to show you how to do that. So once they sign it, you're going to scan it and put it in your loop, right? Because that's where all your shit goes, in the loop. And then when you submit your offer to the listing broker, you submit your offer and include in that your single agent notice. Now, if they don't read it, shame on them, but that is considered full disclosure. Here's my submission of my offer, and then there's a single agent. So Chris, understand, I'm looking out for the best interest of my buyer. We are not transaction brokers. We are not friends. So don't tell me shit you don't want me to know, because I'm going straight to my client with it.
And we have in the past, before we were fully aware of this, told you, if you're a single agent, lay in the grass, gather the info, get everything that you need, and make sure that you represent your client. But the guidelines are now saying that you must disclose this to the other party.
You can't lay in the grass and pretend you're a transaction broker and really you're a single agent. It's just not right.
So in every single loop, whenever you write an offer, you will have the brokerage relationship disclosure. I'm going to go and search for it. So let's just say you wanted to be a single agent for your buyer and you don't have a contract or anything yet. Technically, you're supposed to have this signed at the time of your first interaction with them. So when you're going to show homes, you should be having them sign the single agent notice then. But if you don't do it then, whenever you're writing a contract, the brokerage relationship disclosure is the form.
Well, let me add to that while you're doing it, because I think this is important. Everybody is a transaction broker, period, unless they sign up for single agency.
Correct.
So why would we offer that and not get something in return? It's a superior form of representation. So Mr. Buyer, my broker will allow me to, I will represent your interest in this transaction as a single broker, but this is what I would do. I want you to sign a buyer broker agreement guaranteeing that I'm going to make 3%, because there's a lot of, I'll say assholes because I can, in the marketplace. We just had one yesterday. The son of a gun took a 6% listing. It's got a 4.5% commission to the listing broker and 1.5% to us. And we're doing all the work. So, hey, if the listing broker is going to short me from 3%, you're going to make up the difference. And I'll ask the seller to pay it, because I'll be instructed from you as my client to do it. But what a great way. If I'm going to offer you single agency, and in return, I want a 3% commission. And that'll get you around all the crap with these discount brokers and all the other stuff that's going on out there.
There's a couple ways to do what Craig is discussing. So if you just want to be a single agent with the consent to transition, all you're going to need is the brokerage relationship disclosure form. That's the only one. It'll have all of the documents you need. It has your single agent notice. This just puts them on notice and discloses to them that I will be your single agent, providing you, and I always tell them this.
Loyalty, full disclosure, obedience. Those are the four, FOLC right there. That's not in the transaction broker notice.
When I'm talking to a seller, when I'm going on a listing, even if I was talking to a buyer, I would tell them, now the reason that we're going to use this is so I can represent you properly and put your interest above everybody else's. Now, if you're interviewing anybody else, I really want you to consider this.
Ask them.
If they do not ask you to sign a form like this, like I am, they cannot provide you with loyalty. They cannot keep your confidential information confident, and they cannot be obedient to you, and they do not have to fully disclose everything that goes on in this transaction to you. So if you do happen to discuss with other agents, or you do happen to interview other agents for a buyer or a seller, these are the four things you want to look for. If they do not ask you to sign this form, they cannot provide these things to you. Now, don't you think that when you're making the largest purchase in your possible life or selling your largest asset, do you not think that these are four values that your agent should represent you with?
Well, let's do that, because it's complicated.
Yep.
Like everything else, it's complicated, it's complex, and it's
competitive.
Loyalty. What does loyalty mean? Think about it in terms of have you ever been in a situation where you've got two buyers interested in the same house?
Yes.
Okay. Under loyalty, you would have to basically step away from one of those transactions and say, no, I'm representing Chris on this house. So how can I represent Chris and over here represent Kathleen? Because I'm working with both buyers, because I'm a transaction broker in the normal world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how could I be loyal to Chris and Kathleen and represent the same house? And that's a tough question. And maybe you haven't been in it, but you will be in it at some point.
Yeah.
It's nerve-wracking to go through that and feel the obligation. Like it's almost like you're cheating on your spouse.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not a good feeling. So loyalty is, you don't have that as a transaction broker. Hey, Chris, let's put a deal on 123 Any Street. Hey, Bob, let's put a deal on 123 Any Street. Hey, Susie, let's put a offer on 123 Any Street. I can do all that shit, right? But under loyalty to you, I'd have to do that. So I couldn't do that as a single agent with 3 different buyers. As a transaction broker, I'm in the wind. Confidentiality, we've talked about. You can tell me, hey, I'm willing to go to 475. And I can use that information kind of against you to keep the deal together as I'm working with the transaction broker listing agent. Not a bad thing, but you may or may not want me to do that.
For your sellers, same thing. If you're working for a seller, you have to keep here's where we screw up. We start disclosing things to the other side just in conversation,
right?
Which is why I love picking up the phone and calling listing agents and just starting to ask questions, because they tell me about Bob and Mary and how they needed to move. And then their son did this and he's going to college and they want to be close to him and he got this job transfer and he has to be there by this time and they got to do this and they have to do. As a single agent, you can't do any of that. Some of that is confidential information that you cannot disclose unless you have permission from the seller to disclose that information. So as a single agent, that's one place that I do see that we do disclose a little more than we should, even if it's relevant to the transaction. Some of it we shouldn't be talking about, because it could potentially put the seller. If I know all that information as a single agent for the buyer, I'm going to use it against that seller. So tell me all day long. That's why I call and ask those questions, because I'm going to do that. But
as a single agent, I'm going to do that. As a transaction broker, I can't.
Exactly. So as a single agent for our seller, we need to keep more of that confidential information confident, and we need to have those discussions. Mr. Seller, now some of the information you've disclosed to me, I would like to use in trying to negotiate some of the terms. Would that be okay with you? We should be having those conversations, because if they find out that you said something about even something as simple as them moving to another state, I didn't want anybody to know about it. Now they do, and they told somebody else that I know that I'm moving. And how did they find that out? Because you told the agent that, who told the buyer, who told a friend of mine. Confidentiality means
confidentiality.
I need to make sure that it's okay for me to disclose any of that information. So we have to be careful with that one little thing in open conversation.
And it happens all the time, because I get conversations with you guys and you say, so we represent the seller. Okay. In most cases we do, because we use this single agent listing agreement with a consent to transition transaction broker. So that's a good thing. But when I hear we represent the buyer, my first question is, do we? Huh? Yeah, it's our buyer. No. Do you have a single agent notice signed by the buyer? No. Well, then we don't represent the buyer. We're a transaction broker.
We represent the transaction.
Let's be very clear on that. You are a transaction broker, period, unless you have a single agent notice signed, which questions we'll figure out how to do that.
So when we hear all of that, my buyer from any agent coming and showing our list, it's not your buyer. It is a buyer, and you are representing a potential transaction in a transactional brokerage relationship. So it's not your buyer. You don't represent the buyer. It's not your client. They are a buyer that you are providing advice to and working towards a transaction with. So there's a slight difference.
So there's your FOLC right there: loyalty, confidentiality, obedience, and full disclosure.
So what about obedience?
That's a risky one.
Yeah.
I'll never forget my real estate school. And I forget a lot of things, because real estate school for me was 35 years ago. My instructor said, technically, if they ask you to wash your car, you have to wash their car.
I have to obey.
I have to obey their commands. You don't have to. You can withdraw from the transaction, say, F off, dude, I'm not doing that shit. But you lose the transaction. So they actually have that control over you, that you have to be obedient to their wishes.
Now, the only time you don't have to obey their commands and wishes is if they're asking you to do something that's illegal, unethical, or that could potentially put you and them. If they tell you to do something that you feel is not in their best interest, you actually have a duty to not obey at the same time. So there's some really gray areas in this. I have to obey what you tell me.
Seller, you're my agent. Hey, get a photograph of the buyers, because we have multiple offers. I want to see what each family looks like. That's a no.
That's illegal. I can't.
No, that's called discrimination. We don't do that. So obedience goes out the window at that point, because it's illegal. And we also have a right to say that.
We also had one where I know you talked with Jim Holloway about this. I can't remember what the seller asked us to do, but it was not in the seller's best interest. And we told them it was not in their best interest. And we talked to Jim and he said, Craig, as a single agent, you have a duty to do what's in their best interest, even if they don't know that it's in their best interest. And that's a fine line, but you do have a duty if you strongly feel that. And you may have to make that decision whether you do the opposite of what they tell you to do because you know it's in their best interest this way. It's very get shaky.
Or withdraw from the transaction.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. I don't think that's right for you. I'm not, I can't help you anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one when you're writing on a $10,000 check, right? But that's what comes with the obligation and the rights of being a single agent.
And we talked about full disclosure already. We discussed that. So that's the main difference. This is the brokerage relationship notice. You have your single agent notice, consent to transition to transaction brokerage, and then your transaction broker notice. And we provide them the transaction broker notice because we're assumed to be a transaction broker. But if we tell them we're a single agent, we want them to be able to decipher the difference.
Right.
Mr. Seller, Mr. Buyer, I am your single agent unless one of these things happens. And then we will consent. You're automatically telling me that we can become a transaction broker. Look, you're not going to notice the difference, Mr. Seller, Mr. Buyer. You won't notice the difference. It'll be a seamless transaction. And then at that point, my job becomes, we are all going to play nice in the sandbox. I'm going to make sure that this is the best transaction you've ever had. The listing agent or buyer's agent is going to make sure this is the best transaction they ever had. We're going to walk away from the closing table, shaking hands, singing Kumbaya, saying, I'm so happy that Century 21 Beggins was involved with that transaction. It was the best one that I've ever had the opportunity to be with. So that's how I describe it. And I literally say pretty much that exact same thing. It's my job to make sure we all play nice in the sandbox. Everybody gets what they want. You want the sale of this property for the most amount of money. They want this home for the best deal possible. We put all that together. We all shake hands and walk away at closing, knowing that we got exactly what we wanted and everybody is satisfied. And that's my job and my goal.
This won't be a popular statement, but the easiest thing to say is my brokerage will make sure this transaction comes together. You take the pressure out of you. It's not you and me working together under the same brokerage. It's the brokerage. You get the whole friggin' team working for you. And that's the only reason you'd be a transaction broker in a transaction with a Beggins agent is because our brokerage is looking out for all of us are working for the transaction.
What if, good point. We have a buyer. We've delivered a single agent notice to them and we're showing them a listing. And down in the bottom of the listing, their commission being offered is 3% to a transaction broker, 0 to a non-rep, and 1% to a single agent.
You're due 1%.
Because we have to deliver the single agent notice when we submit the contract.
Most of the times that's not the case, by the way.
No, it's not. Most agents understand and know that if they're working with a single agent, they're working with a professional.
I personally think if the rest of our economy was up to speed with our intelligence level, we should pay 3% to a single agent and 2.5% or 2% to a transaction broker. They're not doing the same amount of service. They shouldn't be paid as much. But I don't want to rock the boat. I want to employ those other people to sell our shit. So I don't think it's right to make fun of them. But if in a just world, single agent should be paid more than a transaction broker, should be paid more than a non-rep. But our position as a company has been, we're going to represent our seller's best interest, which any moron, bring us a friggin' buyer, we'll take care of the deal. But your house is sold.
So this is your single agent notice, consent to transition, and transaction broker, the brokerage relationship disclosure. This should be and will be in all of your contract folders whenever you write a contract. You don't need to add it to your listing folders because it's already built into your listing. We use the Florida Association of Realtors single agent listing agreement that has all of this in there already.
Right.
You don't have to worry about that.
So let's say you're going to a for sale by owner, right? What is your transaction relationship?
If I'm going to a for sale by owner, they're automatically assumed to be a transaction brokerage relationship when I walk in the door.
Hi, Fizbo. I'm a transaction broker. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Now, I can engage him as a single agent, right? I wouldn't do that without a signed listing agreement, by the way. But if I sign a listing agreement like our package in .loop has, you will become a single agent, but we will be authorized the right to transition to a transaction broker in the event another Beggins agent is to do. So that covers us on a listing agreement. But let's say you're doing a commission agreement, not a listing agreement. Just, hey, if I bring John and Mary Smith and they buy this house, could you be a single agent for the Fizbo? Yeah. Should you? No. We're not representing him. He's representing himself.
Well, if you're
but you're gonna be, let me finish this. You're gonna be a transaction broker because that's what you are. In Florida, you're a transaction broker. Now, I would say, Fizbo, you want to represent yourself? Good luck, dude.
Yep.
here's my notice of non-representation. I don't represent you. I've got a buyer who I may or may not be, let's say I'm representing the buyer because I have a single agent notice signed. Then I've got to put you on notice that, hey, I'm representing this buyer.
Yep.
Right. Because you understand that I am a transaction broker, because that's what all of us are in Florida. So if I change my role from transaction broker to single agent or non-rep, I've got to put you on notice.
Yep.
So, hey, FSBO, here's a commission agreement. I want you to sign up. I got John and Mary in my back pocket. They want to buy. I don't represent you. Here's my notice of non-rep. Right. And here's my commission agreement. Pay me 3% if I do it.
Yep.
We're not doing that as a whole, I don't think, which means you're a transaction broker. So if the FSBO tells me, hey, you know, I'm really in a bind, I lost my job, I got 1 more month and I can't make my payments, I'm going default. I can't tell my buyer that because I'm a transaction broker.
Correct.
But if I'm a single agent, I've disclosed, and this is the point, and I've disclosed to you that I'm a single agent, and you make that faux pas and tell me that, I'm going straight to my buyer. This guy's against the ropes. We're going to beat the shit out of him.
So
he's got 1 more month or he's going to default, and then he's in trouble.
Just being clear, if you have a buyer interested in a for sale by owner, if you are a single agent for that buyer,
you have to.
If you are a single agent for your buyer, meaning you have the brokerage relationship disclosure form signed for your buyer and they're interested in a for sale by owner, you must deliver a notice of non-representation to the for sale by owner if you're going to remain a single agent for your buyer. Must. Or you have to sever the single agent notice with your buyer. But it's easier to go to the for sale by owner, get a commission agreement, like Craig said, that says they're going to pay you. There's nothing mentioned in there about relationships. Then deliver them a notice of non-representation, a no rep notice. I do not represent you. Do not listen to me. Do not take my advice. Don't ask me questions. I don't represent you in any capacity. And when I deliver an offer, it's going to also tell him that I am a single agent for this buyer. You have to do all of those steps if you are a single agent for your buyer and going to a for sale by owner.
And why would you give a for sale by owner any rights anyway? They chose to be their own agent and represent themselves.
But here's the way
Not being mean. You want to represent yourself? Go ahead, dude.
Here's
I
the
don't
way you use
represent
it.
you.
Here's the way you use it, Mr. For Sale by Owner. So I've got a buyer that's interested in your property, but I must tell you that there's a couple different ways that we can move forward with this transaction. I can deliver to you a notice of no representation and let you know that I only represent this buyer and I do not represent you at all. And I'm going to give you a commission agreement that says you'll pay me 3%.
Perfect.
But
I'm strong, me, caveman like bull.
But let me ask you a few questions about contracts, about blah, 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 blah. Just ask you a few questions about that. But if you are interested,
I can be a
transaction broker for this entire transaction. I could help represent the transaction for you and the buyer and make sure that everybody abides by their rights and obligations, gets to the closing table. And I'd be willing to do that for 4 or 5%. Because I don't have to do any marketing for you. I'm not doing any listings. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just going to facilitate from here forward to closing. Would that sound like a better deal for you? So you're not having to go against a professional who's done this for a living and negotiates. My sole job is to put you to a detriment. Would you rather we work together on this and get the closing?
It depends on where I am on the cockiness scale.
Correct.
In the beginning, I'm super cocky. No, me strong like bull.
Yep.
I'll represent myself. And then you go terrorize me.
Yep.
No, you know what? I'm a little nervous about this. I haven't done it before. I would rather at least be on the same page. Let's be transaction broker. I'll pay you 4.
And then you go to your buyer. If you were a single agent, you let them know, hey, we're going to consent to transition. We're going to be a transaction broker in this because I feel like that's going to be the best thing for this entire transaction. You can discuss that with them. Or if you don't have the single agent notice signed, don't sign the single agent notice, be a transaction broker. If the for sale by owner only wants to pay you 3% and accepts the notice of no rep, be a single agent for your buyer and wipe the floor with them. Get the buyer the best deal possible.
My dad used to have this hat. He actually wore it in training, and this was the hat, and it said single agent, right? So you're walking around with your buyer and your seller, and I'm a single agent, I'm a single agent. But the minute that you walk into a Century 21 Beggins listing, you got to take your hat, turn it around and say transaction broker. Now I'm a transaction broker buyer, and now I'm a transaction broker seller, because they don't know what you are by looking at you, right?
Correct.
So the way we compensate that without wearing a hat is by having a form that's signed and delivered. And now it's so easy because we put it in dot loop and we can just attach it to our
Correct. Couple questions. What if you have them sign all three before you show a property you're covered?
Yes.
Perfect. That's exactly correct. We would like you to do that. If you are going to be a single agent, have that form signed, the single agent notice, consent to transition, and transaction broker notice. That's the brokerage relationship.
If not, you got to walk around and show all houses that are not our listing as a single agent and then go stop, pause. I got to turn my hat around. I'm a transaction broker now. We go into 123 Main Street.
Yep.
And you don't want to do that. So we get around it by signing single agent, consent to transition, and then describe what a transaction broker role is.
Correct. And then a couple other questions we
There
had.
were some at the top I wanted to
Yeah,
address.
that's what we're going back to. Cannot tell about.
Because this is good. We have a lot of questions surrounding this. We haven't talked about it in detail.
As a listing agent, am I required to disclose to the buyer's agent that I'm a single agent?
Yes.
And how are we doing that? I know we talked about it before, putting it into every realtor remark for all of our listings, but we haven't done that.
No, we have not done that.
And we haven't attached it to the attachment. So we are in essence not disclosing to the buyer's agent. So we need to
Is
make sure we
Angelique
clarify
online
that.
now?
She probably is.
Or Sammy?
Sam is.
And Angelique. Okay,
And
so
Angelique.
make a note. We need to automatically, Sam, put in listing remarks. Seller is represented as a single agent.
Now, when we select, that was the one thing we discussed in the MLS form, there's the seller represented, seller not represented. If we select seller represented,
That probably would be the disclosure.
that's probably what the MLS form is meant to intend to say, but everybody selects seller represented, even if they're not a single agent. So, or do we want to go the extra step?
I think we go the extra step.
Angelique said yes. Yes to what, Ange, if you don't mind?
No, she'll put
clarifying?
it in the public remarks automatic or
Okay, can we put
realtor remarks.
to the realtor remarks that Century 21 Beggins is a single agent?
Because we are, because unless you modify your loop, what we put into the loop is a single agent consent to transition transaction broker listing agreement. So Century 21 Beggins is a single agent for all of our sellers unless you change the listing agreement.
Carla said, I have them sign a transition form with the listing paperwork. You don't need
You
to
don't
do
need
that,
to.
Carla. It's
It's-
built into the listing agreement.
Correct.
I'll show you. Our listing agreement has, it's a standard FAR.
Well, if you go to our templates, that one that's in there is that one.
So the standard FAR single agent.
Look at the name at the bottom page. It'll say. Usually it does. We'll keep
Oh, come
going.
here.
Single agent notice,
Right here.
and then it'll have consent to transition to transaction broker.
The next page is consent to
And then
transition.
it's going to define what a transaction broker is.
So there, you don't need to add that to your listings because if you use our templated forms, it is already included and it's
Now, if
already
you
there.
go to Florida Interactive Forms and you choose listing agreement, you'll see a transaction broker listing agreement, you'll see a non-rep listing agreement, and you'll see a single agent with consent to transition to transaction broker listing agreement. So you could pick the wrong one, but if you use our template loops, you'll be set.
Is the brokerage relationship doc that we submit with our offers not considered notice? Lauren, that's exactly what we're talking about. Now, as you're submitting an offer, not everybody has been doing that. They've not been submitting a single agent notice to to the listing agent if you're a buyer's agent. So you can submit the brokerage relationship disclosure form with your offer to the listing agent, letting them know that you are a single agent, and that's what's required. You need to disclose to them that you are.
All right, so I've got a buyer and it's a buyer who's been a friend for a long time and they know what they want and they found a house in Shady Oaks and it's the perfect one for them. So I can just simply have them sign a single agent notice. I don't need the transaction broker consent to, I don't need any of that shit. Here's your single agent notice. I'm representing you. Then I go to the listing broker or the for sale by owner and I say, by the way, here's my single agent. I represent the seller, right?
Mhm.
Or when I submit my offer for e-signature through .loop, I'll include the single agent notice just as a disclosure. And then because disclosure to the agent is deemed as good as disclosure to the consumer. But I think we haven't been, well, first of all, we haven't been executing the single agent notice because I don't see them in your loops, number one.
And that's
And-
okay. That's okay if you're not a single
We don't
agent.
want you to be a single agent unless you want to be a single agent.
Less liability for
I
us,
love
less problems for us. If you're a transaction broker, think
That
about,
lawsuit I just talked about, if we were a transaction broker, we had to defend that woman.
now, if
If
we were a
single agent, we would have to defend that woman and we would have a lot more liability in her making the wrong
Yeah.
decision that she made.
Correct.
But as a single agent, I was a transaction broker. She came in and said, look, I'm badass. I know my stuff. And she decided to get her own loan officer to go after a co-op, and the loan officer was not familiar with co-ops, and she missed her deadline and she lost her deposit. And she was pissed, and I don't blame her, but she acted like a professional and we were a transaction broker. All we did was fulfill her obligations and said, I want you to help me write an offer on this property. This is my lender. He knows what I want. He knows how much money I make. He knows all this stuff. We did what she asked us to do. That's fine. Now, we did not have FOLC to guide her further, but she's alleging, her new attorney is alleging that we didn't represent her properly, but we didn't represent her at all because we were not a single agent. And
Correct.
that's where this fine line falls through. And I want to make sure you guys are aware enough to go through and say, oh, I got this shit. I think I told you I got subpoenaed, and it was me alone. Our agent wasn't there. And I had 6 lawyers around this table in this impressive mediation room. And it's intimidating. Just it
Yeah.
is. And the agency discussion came up, and there's 6 lawyers in the room. And they said, would you explain agency to us? And I went on and I just did a fantastic job. And the lawyers went, holy shit, we had no idea it was like that.
Yeah, attorneys have
Attorneys have no idea.
no idea how it works. That's
Right.
why we get some of the lawsuits we have. It's like, do
Mhm.
you not understand how real estate laws work? Because your claims are completely show that you have no clue.
Right. There's really good lawyers at land use, and they know shit about this brokerage relationships, right? And there's really good lawyers at accidents and car damage and things like that, and they know nothing about real estate. And a lot of times your friends or your clients talk to a lawyer who does not know real estate. I'll take that lawyer on all day long.
So if we have a listing, receive an offer, different brokerage, send them single agent notice to the buyer's agent at time of counter. We won't need to do that.
It's
check-
their duty. Now, that's the problem. Let's say, mom, you've got the listing and the agent submits an offer on behalf of their buyer, and they don't tell you they're a single agent. Then you are fully in your right to presume they're a transaction broker, because they are, right? Now, if they send you with the offer a single agent notice, they're putting you on notice. Hey, I'm a single agent. Keep your mouth shut. Don't tell me any dirt on your customer, because I'm going straight to my buyer with it. But in the absence of them giving you a notice that they're a single agent, you can trust that they're a transaction broker. Now, in honesty, most agents don't get that, and they still spill their guts and blah, 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 and
Correct,
spill
yeah.
everything. And they shouldn't be doing that, right? But that's why I want Angelique and Sam to make sure it's in our listing agreement under Realtor Remarks. We represent the seller as a single agent. So in other words, bitch, don't tell me what you don't want me to tell my seller. Right. And that's a tough one to see, but it's not being played that way. And so we got to get really diligent. If we're going to flex this muscle, we got to exercise it and make sure we're disclosing it.
Elizabeth and Chrissy Autumn, it should already be into your offer loops. The offer loop when she submits the offer. So it's already in your contract loop, your brokerage relationship disclosure. It's already in your
Yeah.
contract loop. We've templated it that way so that it's there. If you would like to be a single agent, make sure you sign that and send that over with your offer.
Put it in your loop
Correct.
and then include it in your offer. Well, we
Correct.
spent a lot of time on that one.
But there's a lot of clarity. Now, another thing that you had mentioned was, if you want to have your buyer, I want to be a single agent for my buyer. And hey, some people are offering 1.5% like we saw, and I'm going to be your single agent, but you're going to make sure that I get paid my full 3%.
And I got your back. We're going to ask the seller to pay it. Right. Just because his agent was strong enough for being a hoe, keeping 4.5. Hey, a condition of my buyer's offer is that you make sure my brokerage gets paid 3%. See my words though? You make sure my brokerage, because you don't get paid a commission. It's illegal for you to get a commission. So seller, Central and Beggins buyer is requesting that you pay Beggins a 3% commission. So consider that in your offer.
So when you do that, though, you can't use the regular brokerage relationship disclosure to be a single agent. You've got these other brokerage relationship disclosures, a exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with a consent to transition to transaction broker if you want to be their single agent with consent to transition. Or if I just want to be their single agent and I'm not going to show them any of our listings, or it's just for this one specific property and the buyer is going to I'm going to represent the buyer as a single agent and they're going to pay me, you would use this form that says, Mr. Buyer, this is an agreement between the brokerage and you that you're going to compensate me for representing you as a single agent. That is one of my obligations. You're going to pay me this amount for this property or any other property within this timeline, and I will represent you as a single agent in this transaction. This is the compensation. Here's the protection period, and I will be your single agent. If you want the buyer to pay your commission, this is the way that you would do it, and be a single agent, you would use this form. And there's also one
But
that
that
has-
also, that basically is a listing agreement for the buyer.
correct.
So the buyer's committing, hey, Chris, if I buy any house in Hillsborough County in the next whatever period, 90 days, you're getting a commission, whether I go to MI Homes or Lennar or any, it's a great way to do it. Like Duncan Duo, all their buyers agents on their team, they get a buyer broker agreement signed on every buyer. Right? I remember we had an agent, remember Aaron?
Mhm.
Girl had no scruples. She found a buyer who was under contract on another house. They didn't want that house. They called her. They found another house they wanted. They showed her, they had her show her that house. She wrote the contract. Well, guess what? That buyer's agent was on a buyer team, and that team leader made them have buyer broker agreement signed. So Aaron sold this house that was with a buyer who was exclusively represented by another brokerage. And she got no commission because the buyer signed a buyer broker agreement.
But so in that scenario, if we showed the property, we wrote the offer, we would be due the commission, and it's up to the buyer to pay.
Yes, that was the case. The buyer had to pay a commission to their broker.
So,
And
in-
the buyer said, I'm not going to buy this house if I got to pay commission to another.
so we ended up with nothing, and then they ended up working with the brokerage they had the relationship with. And that doesn't have to be a single agent notice. That can just be a
That was just a
typical
buyer broker agreement
buyer broker.
with no
agreement.
agency.
No, that's it.
Yeah, there's a difference between agency. You can be a buyer's broker and have a buyer broker contract. This was happened to be the buyer broker contract with single agent notice. There's also a buyer broker contract with transaction broker.
Correct.
There's also a buyer broker with no rep, non-rep at all.
There's one right here. If you want to make sure they pay you and you're just going to be a transaction broker, it's right here.
Mhm.
If you want to be a single agent and consent to transition, because you know you might show some of our listings, you would use the consent to transition one, and they'll pay you then. If you don't want to represent them in any capacity as anything, there's a no brokerage relationship that says you will pay me and I don't represent you in any way, shape, or form. So,
Michelle said, I scheduled a showing, and in showing time, I had to answer a question about what, that's perfect. I love that. Use showing time as much as you can. Contract between buyer and seller, how does commission come in on that?
not sure what the question is, John. If you-
Well, I think I know where it's going. If it's an MLS listed property, and this is a big thing, actually, when I was in the Sun on Sunday, I read the Florida Realtor magazine, which I don't usually do, and now I know I don't. But to John's point, which you just took down the screen.
you go. There you go.
Do it again.
It was contract between.
Contract between buyer, how does seller come in on that? Contract between buyer and seller. Oh, the MLS. It was talked about the proficiency of the MLS, if it's needed or not. And it used an AI chatbot to ask the question to describe if MLSs were valuable or not. That was the article. And the AI did a fantastic job explaining why MLSs are valid and should still be around, and how price fixing is not a component. I mean, the AI went through all this. So it said that must have been really reading some good articles. So the MLS in its rare form is a universal offer of compensation. So if you're showing a property on the MLS, you have a commission offer built in. It is what it is. It might be 1.5%, but that's what you're going to get. You're being told. It doesn't tell you what the listing broker is charging, but your offer of compensation is expressly listed in the MLS profile and guaranteed that that's what you get. Now, when you go show a FSBO, there's no guarantee of commission. So you want to get a commission agreement up front before you show that, because there's no MLS listing guaranteeing you compensation. I mean, these are all the nuances that happen behind the scenes in the brokerage business that when not NAR, but the courts and all that shit get it, they don't get all this, right?
Yeah.
But MLS is for us being
It's-
realtors.
It's a contract between brokerages. The brokers enter into a contract that says, I will put my properties into this MLS and offer compensation. If you are the procuring cause and bring a buyer and transact, this is what you'll get paid. And it's a contract for the brokers, who are the buyer's agents, remember, saying, I know if I go show any of these properties, I will be guaranteed whatever compensation is listed as long as I'm the procuring cause. So in that scenario that he mentioned, even though that buyer had an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with another agent, if we didn't know about that and we showed them property, the agreement between brokerages says, my brokerage put this listing in and will compensate the brokerage who brought the buyer. I don't care about outside agreements. I cannot change any outside agreements, any outside contracts. The contract is between brokerages. You bring me a buyer, I compensate you.
Yeah.
Whatever your buyer did outside of the MLS agreement that I have between brokerages, that's up to the buyer. And now the buyer is responsible to fulfill that.
Yeah. So watch this. So I've had it happen to me in times where the buyer's agent is the buyer. And the buyer will write a note in the contract saying buyer brokerage will, what's the word?
Reduce commission.
Will
pay.
take no commission
Got
on this transaction. Now that gets tricky on 2 points. One, can the agent give away the broker's commission?
No.
No. So the broker would have to sign that clause because Century 21 Beggins is offering Coldwell Banker 3% if their agent sells our listing. So the agent can't say Coldwell Banker doesn't want my commission. The broker would have to sign that.
Correct. That's
So
why we
get into those, and Sammy will catch these, and
correct.
you guys get busy, but
That's why
we're
we
protecting
ask you in situations like that, the agent can't write it in the contract or send something. We need something from the brokerage, and typically a letter on letterhead that says the brokerage is agreeing to forego the MLS offer of compensation.
we're going to
in
reject the
lieu
MLS
of-
offer of compensation is the technical words
Yep.
we want to use.
in lieu of whatever
Mm-hmm.
they're going to take, whether it's a small fee or no fee, or reject it completely.
Mhm. Well, let's say I got a buyer broker agreement and the buyers agreed to pay me 3%. Okay, well, it's the same thing, right? It's a $400,000 house. What's the seller going to net paying a 3% commission? 388. So offer 388 and don't pay me a commission because my buyers pay me the commission. It's just trading dollars on the HUD statement. It's the same math, same net proceeds to the seller.
Yeah.
Oh, I had 4 more contract issues and you had a bunch of
I had it
contracts.
listed and we're already at 30.
We're
so-
never going to run out of time on this one. But anyway, the thought to me, when you and I were talking yesterday was we got to get this agency thing drilled down. So number one, yes, we are single agents when we have a listing. So that has to be disclosed. We just fix that as a company because that's going to be put in there.
Mhm.
And then you, if you have your buyer sign a single agent notice, you need to let the other brokerage know that you're a single agent because it's not a big deal if you don't, but if there's a problem, there's a problem.
It becomes a problem when
Well, now I've got a lawyer saying,
there
hey.
is a problem, because now the other brokerage, now that there's a problem, is going to go back and say, you didn't tell me you were a single agent. I would have done this differently.
Had
if
I
you had
known
that."
this, I wouldn't have done that.
That's what we never want to hear. So the Florida Realtor guidelines that do state that if you are a single agent, it must be disclosed at the time of your offer. So you do have to disclose that.
Nice.
Cool.
All right. Well, Angelique, you can label this one as agency discussion and that'll work.
Yeah.
And with 58, yeah, not a lot of hands. This one should be watched by a lot of people. So we'll send it out.
Good 65. And that's pretty
Nice.
normal, between 60 and 75 typically.
Almost as many people as have in the room.
Yeah, it's full day.
Keep your sound down. Quiet.
All right, guys, have an awesome Wednesday. If you need anything, we are available. Reminder, the rest of this week here in the training room, Thursday through Sunday, if you wanted to pop in for any of the
Oh, Tony Robbins.
Robbins UPW event, that will be going
There'll
on.
be a lot of
there.
it's going on.
Lots of jumping up and down. Whoever's downstairs is going to hear it. So if you would like to, if you're looking to, create some change or get a little momentum, show up for some of those days.
Yeah, the advice is sign up, pay the course, get the book, do all the stuff.
Yep.
But if you want to be an onlooker and just kind of sneak in, you can do that too, because we got that permission.
All right, guys, Craig's going to go home and take his pants off and do the rest of his meetings.
That's right.
You guys, happy Wednesday. Have an awesome day.